Okay, let's just let's look at these old ones. Okay, so I have a thing I found here that just lists all the dungeons and raids in the game. Very simple. We're just going to talk about each raid very briefly and just, you know, talk about maybe some of the significant fights in them. But going from Cataclysm, we have Barrett and Hold, which was like that. I think Barrett and Hold was the one that was attached to that like battleground, and there was like one boss in there. I vividly remember doing this boss. I don't even remember what the boss's name was in there. Well, it was really easy though. Yeah, it was like Vault of Archivon. I just don't remember what the name of the boss was. But a Bastion of Twilight, super cool. That was the Cho'Gall raid with Sinestra as the last boss. That was like one of the. That was actually. Was that the first like heroic only boss, Sinestra? Am I missing one before that? I believe it was the first, like, because it ended up being mythic only later, but like I think it was the very first. Oh, Algalon. Oh, sorry, Algalon. Yeah. Okay, Throne of the Four Winds, kind of cool. You have to look at Blackwing Descent, Bastion of Twilight, and Throne of the Four Winds kind of in the same raid. They were the same tier. Again, you'll kind of notice when we talk about these that like it's a little bit different now that the raids aren't tiers because they look at raids now as standalone raids, and they don't look at them in one giant tier. Like an example of that would be the beginning of Legion, right? The beginning of Legion was Emerald Nightmare, Trial of Valor, and then Nighthold, okay? But Nighthold, because it was the raid that actually had tier gear in it, if you got World First in Emerald Nightmare and then World First in Trial of Valor, but then got World Third in Nighthold, you would have gotten World Third for that whole tier. Basically, it was really weird, but the way at least it looked on WoW Progress, which was the only real ranking at the time, which everyone cared about, was, you know, basically the big raid was the only one, and everything kind of got sweeped in under that. Because of that, I feel like the raids that weren't tier raids didn't get as much like look or care into them, where that's totally different now, right? You know, like compare Emerald Nightmare, compare like tier 11 that you're looking at here, compare the first tier of Mop to like Uldir, even though it's a little hard to compare them because there's 2-3 boss raids for Mop and Cataclysm at the beginning. But you have, you know, like clearly Uldir and Nathria were like strong enough to be standalone raids. If you like, the amount of bosses don't matter, but like the amount of difficult bosses and the end bosses were all good, right? So they definitely view, since BFA, starting with Uldir, there's really no difference between a first raid of the expansion versus the last raid of the expansion because they just, you know, because there's no tier, they're all their own thing. So it's a little bit different. Then Firelands, this is probably going to be on a lot of people's list. I'm not sure where it lands on mine yet, but Heroic Ragnaros changed rating forever. Dragon Soul, okay. Maybe a hot take about Dragon Soul. Just like a very brief thing. Dragon Soul was actually a really good raid. It's one of the best raids, actually, in my opinion, ever, except for the last two. Like, Spine of Deathwing, disaster. Madness of Deathwing, bigger disaster. There's so many issues with Spine and Madness. The biggest one being how anticlimactic it was, right? Like, you would do Spine, and then it was so hard for like kind of weird, not really, like really weird reasons. And then you did Madness and it was like easier. It's why Stone Legion Generals is bad, right? You do 10 minutes of a super hard fight and then you one-shot the end. Like what, you know, so that was kind of like what Dragon Soul was. And then also that was the first long farm period. But I think Dragon Soul gets too much flack for having a long farm period because it was just, I don't know, like, there have been multiple farm periods that were longer. Siege of Orgrimmar was longer. Hellfire Citadels was longer. Nyalotha's farm was longer. Like, basically every farm in recent memory was actually longer than Dragon Soul's was. But I remember so many people complaining that they didn't like Dragon Soul because of the farm, and I never really got that. I mean, obviously at the time, like, those other expansions I just mentioned haven't happened yet. But even to this day, people still lament over Dragon Soul farm, which is strange. But I kind of missed my other point earlier. Hagara, as soon as it got, like, honestly, even, like, you killed Morchok, and then the two bosses on the left and right were each unique. They weren't super easy. They were, like, kind of cool. Very different. Maybe go, like, show you guys videos of Dragon Soul one day, because it's a long time ago. We're not going to do that today. Like, Hagara was good. Ultraxion was good. Warmaster Blackhorn was good. Like, it was just, like, good difficulty curve. It had a nice, like, single-target burn boss. It looked good. It was like, I think everything about that raid, again, I don't think what I'm saying is clouded in nostalgia either. It was actually like a really good raid leading up to it, which is pretty rare, actually. So very, very, very cool, Dragon Soul. Only reason I'm going to take enough time on that is because it didn't get enough credit. Okay, moving on to Mop. In my opinion, the best expansion ever, but that's not what today's topic is. The raids obviously looked great, but were great. 2 of these are going to be on basically every, if not top 5, 2 of these raids are going to be on everyone's, you know, top 6 or 7. Mogushan Vault's Heart of Fear and Terrace Venless Spring was very, very similar to like the first raid of tier 11, or so like the first raid of Cataclysm, where it had Bastion of Twilight, Throne of the Four Winds, and Blackwing Descent, but it wasn't out at the same time. That was the difference. So it came out Mogushan Vaults first, which was a very easy raid, like probably maybe the second easiest raid in my recollection besides Emerald Nightmare. Heart of Fear was awesome. Heart of Fear was good enough to be a standalone raid. In fact, it actually had one of the coolest first bosses ever. In fact, it was so hard it needed to be nerfed. But Imperator, the first boss in Heart of Fear, was like really, really difficult. Like, and I mean, it's certainly the hardest first boss of a raid ever. If it, actually, dude, I want to show a video. I just don't know how much time I have. No, I am gonna show you a video of that because it's just so different. Like, there we go. Okay, so you fought the boss here. Like, P1 was like kind of normal, but here's where it gets cool, dude. You have to like fight his clones a little bit. That's like normal first boss stuff. But then look what happens when you go do the last phase, dude. Also, shout out to Nagura and a few other people in here. The last phase, the boss clones himself, and look at this dodging. All these sonar things, that's all like the sonar on the ground and the green shit, that's all a one-shot, dude. Oh yeah, is this Sparkhugs POV? Dude, what a legend, man. Dude, isn't it sad that like there's probably tons of raiders today who have no idea who Sparkhugs is? Force and Verve, it has like mass AoE, intricate positioning. It was also like impossibly hard. It has like an MC you have to break people out of. And then while you're also dodging again in the corner. This fight was so hard to dodge, you had to keep him in a corner and then literally run to the middle of the room and basically not hit him just to live. Yeah, fucking cool ass boss, man. I mean, also, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna unmute it at the end because I'm pretty sure they yell. We'll risk the DMCA for the screams. Dude, how many times do you hear people act like that on a first boss of a raid? So I thought I'd give them a little shout out. Okay, so first boss of that, really fucking cool. Terrace Venless Spring looked cool, but it was kind of weird. The first boss had a really, really interesting mechanic to it, and the mechanic was you could kill the bosses in a certain order, similar to Council, but there was one order that was like designated the hard mode that actually dropped better loot. That a lot of people like. It was kind of cool because when you did the boss when it first came out, you had to decide whether you wanted to go for like the OP loot for like your first clear, right? Like, oh, do we do the harder version on purpose so we get better loot to kill, you know, Shaw faster than other guilds? So like it was kind of like a give and take. In fact, I don't remember how many guilds actually did it in the first, how many people did it there, but yeah, it was a very cool looking raid. Small blemish on Terrace though is the last boss was like, okay, I might be exaggerating. I did the boss in progression. I should also point out that like, I mean, basically I started in Cataclysm, but like this is when I got like good for the first time. But like, I think it was 20 minutes. Like I actually think it was 20 minutes long. It's something like, yeah, wasn't that 22-minute first kill? Yeah, I mean, it's a really fucking cool fight though. Like, look at this 24-minute video. So there was like this weird part in the first part of the phase where like the boss would be, or this is showing a low wipe. That's why it's a little bit longer. But like you do this first part, but if you ever make it to the last phase, one thing they did do is they gave you like a haste buff that you got every pull to get through this part faster. And this part was just like you're upstairs, you go and do these little side platforms. It was like actually kind of a cool fight. Like you had to like dodge this shit in a circle, right? Or that was just raid damage. I think that one. There was another one you could dodge. You finally phased into the last phase, and then it was just like this empty room. There was like a cool little orb throwing thing if you weren't there at the time. It's called, I think it was called Champion of the Light. But basically, yeah, so Leeds, Roger Brown, and one other player are throwing this orb to each other in a triangle. And what it's doing is these dread spawns are running to the person with the light orb. So basically the strat was you put a triangle around the boss, threw it between 3 players. If you ever let them hit you, it would destroy the item and kill you, I think. So you had to like get them grouped and you could never actually let them touch you. So it was like really, really spooky. It was probably the cause of a lot of wipes. But I mean, obviously a simple macro and communication can cover that. But it was like a really, really, really cool fight. But only problem is it was way too long. 20-minute end boss, not good. Yeah, they kill this at 20 minutes into the fight. Also, this is like one of the iconic...
Oh no.
Dang it.
Wait, do they do the they're coming? This is one of the iconic calls in my memory when they were killing a boss world first, is they had one of their players just kite these ads in the middle of nowhere, and then they start coming back. If you guys remember, they're coming! It's something like that.
Come on, guys. Kill it.
They're coming!
No! They're coming!
They're coming! That always fucking got me so good. Okay. And then we go on to Throne of Thunder. You guys have heard me speak about this raid a lot. Maybe you know where I'll rank it, maybe not. This raid was fucking incredible. I think one thing to mention, though, is I think sometimes Throne of Thunder and Siege of Orgrimmar get a lot more credit maybe than they deserve. If I'm going to be a like critic of it, because Throne of Thunder and Siege of Orgrimmar were made much better by the trinkets that were in that era. Like, if we did a trinket tier list at one point on this stream, and I think like 4 or 5 Siege of Orgrimmar and Throne trinkets were in like the top 10 all time. Like, they had the Unerring Vision of Lei Shen for casters. It had Rune of Reorigination for feral druids and Windwalker monks at the time before their mastery changed. And then Siege of Orgrimmar had the like stat amp trinkets and CDR trinkets and all that shit. It was like the first time trinkets got really, really cool. So keep them, and also without question, whether you like Mop or not, because I know like if you're in the like I don't like pandas crowd and that's why you disliked Mop, just understand our opinions will always be different on stuff because we clearly play the game for different reasons and appreciate different things. For me, all I care about is raids and class design, and that's it. Class design was unquestionably the best it ever was in the history of WoW in Mist of Pandaria. You could not argue otherwise. And because of that, I feel like Throne of Thunder and Siege, even though they're great raids, and we'll watch a couple videos from a couple bosses here, Throne was just a beautiful raid. It had multiple intricate bosses. Like Ji-Kun was awesome, was like a mid-tier boss where you were like flying around to platforms, a decent DPS and heal check. You went on to Duramu, the eyeball, where it was like pushing you around the room and there was like invisible shit. Like the ads were invisible. In fact, it was so funny. I think the strat on Duramu, if I remember, was actually to have demo locks pulsing that AoE. And if you had enough demo locks, it actually was enough passive damage to kill the invisible ads before they spawned and killed them. In fact, if you had too many demo locks, it actually wiped you because you killed them too fast and like they did raid damage when they blew up and everyone died. And then you moved on. There was like a weird boss in like the middle of a room. It didn't really matter too much. It was right before Dark Animus. Primordius, I'm thinking something like that. Not too important. Dark Animus, incredible boss. A lot of people hate it because it was hard. It was a unique idea and concept. I won't rank or talk about Dark Animus, though, because I went on a 1-week vacation in the middle of progression during Throne of Thunder, and it was the entirety of Dark Animus progress, and I literally never did it. I killed every boss in that raid on progression. It was like world top 10 or something, except for that boss. So I got to completely miss it. So I won't give you my opinion on it because I just didn't do it. It was fun and farm though. Okay, moving. It was Iron Quan, I think, was after that, which was like a nice boss. Big dude. Imagine AoE cap on Iron Quan. Twin Consorts, honestly, for a like kind of a technically second to last boss, it was actually kind of weak. It was super powerful at first, and they nerfed it, and then it got shit on. And then Lei Shen, I'll just let you guys watch Lei Shen if you haven't ever seen the fight before. Just look at this fight, dude. It had everything. It had creativity. You could go to certain platforms. Each one of these platforms charged up one of the boss's mechanics to certain levels, and you could decide how you wanted to do the fight. It's like what a Nerva Darkvein, in a much smaller sense, should have been, right? Because, you know, obviously they made the fight on Mythic to where if you drained anything, it just went into other things, so it removed all of your creativity. This fight has, like, you know, Thunderstruck, can't get hit. You have to move away from it. It does raid damage, typical raid mechanic. It does like a frontal you have to dodge. It spawns a bunch of ads you have to AoE down and can't get hit by. Sparks. But the best thing about the fight is throughout the entire fight, including the last phase, you could create your own fight. You decided these bouncing bolts needed to be soaked, right? You decided how you wanted to do it. And then the last phase was just, you could have multiple different strats. Multiple end bosses killed this boss in the last phase with a different strat. Blood Legion had a completely different strat than Method did. Method had their raids spread out on both sides, the boss directly in the middle, and they dealt with the winds. The winds were like destroying them. They soaked the bouncing bolts only on one platform. and then they have to move through this. I forget exactly what it was. Yeah, they gate and move platforms for the Thunderstruck, and they kill it. They have to do one set of ball lightnings, and then they get it pretty low and kill it. I will let you guys listen to the end of this. Dude, every time I hear nerd screams, it like fucking gets me so good because like I know that feeling, man, and that feeling is just there's no better feeling in the world. Okay, but the fight fucking owned. Okay, one knock on Throne of Thunder is Throne of Thunder had an end boss, mythic only, being Ra-Den. Very similar actually to the Ra-Den that you guys know. Look at it here. They actually remade it because they never actually did the fight the correct way the first time. Dude, my targeted ads are on point. Whoa, no, it says toxic poop. Wait, what is this? Why did it say toxic poop? Okay, we got to skip that. I think I misread it. So we have Ra-Den. All right, so this fight, this is the last phase. You pull the boss, so it's just like the Ra-Den happened in current times, except it shit on the tank, and tank vengeance was like a cool thing. You'll see tanks like basically topping. So materials of creation are just the orbs. You have to pick an orb to kill. And it was like Vita and whatever the red thing was. I forget what it was. But basically the strat ended up being just doing the Vita phase over and over again. The reason why there's a buff where if you let the orb hit the boss 2 times in a row on Ra-Den in Nyalotha, if you remember that fight, is because you cheesed the boss when they first made it as a mythic end boss. And I will say the boss's design was actually really good. The boss's design was really good if you did both phases, and Blizzard just totally forgot to do one thing, which was put a thing on the boss where if it ate 2 Vita orbs or 2 Anima orbs in a row, that you just wiped, but they didn't. So the fight ended up just being doing the exact same ability you guys know, Unstable Vita, exact same ability. It's the exact same. But then this other phase was crazy hard, but they just skip it because the next time the orbs come out, they just kill the Anima orb again instead of swapping phases. That's why this fight ended up becoming a meme. Well, regardless, you get to the last phase, and the boss is, I think, the best example of a healer and DPS burn that's ever been in the game, actually. You had to push at the right time, but basically at a certain point, it was killing Anima orbs when they spawned, and having someone soak them, I believe, is why you ran Shadow Priest, actually. In fact, Shadow Priest had Divine Star in this raid, and one of the ways you dealt with this raid damage is your Shadow Priest rotated shooting Divine Stars through the raid as like Shadow Priest off healing, which was like super fucking cool. Okay, so you're in the last phase now. So basically, among other things, all you do is just DPS him and he does damage to you, but look how much the fucking damage ramps. Like, you guys, healing used to be different back in the day. Like, right now, a Trank does like 30% of your health. Like, back then, a Trank just like literally healed the fuck out of you. Now, look at the raid damage, dude. Look at the raid damage, dude. It's so much. Like, healing through this nowadays, this fight isn't designed for like current levels of healing. How long was this fight? Only like 7 minutes or so. But I think that's because you got to avoid the Anima phase. Okay, and then they killed it. Okay, but I will say one small blemish on that raid is the fact that Ra-Den was kind of a letdown. Like, Lei Shen was the last boss of Throne of Thunder, but it wasn't. And because of that, it's anticlimactic. I've criticized other raids for that. I have to criticize Throne. Siege, fucking nuts raid. Fucking nuts raid. I think it actually usually gets bounced off of people's top 5, but I've had people say that they thought Siege of Orgrimmar was their favorite raid they've ever done. You don't need to look at it too much other than watching Siegecraft or Blackfuse. Maybe one of the very, very best, right up there with Star Augur. The way I rank bosses individually is I think you have to rank the end bosses together. You have to rank the penultimate boss together, so the boss right before the last boss, you know, your Zakuls, your Agrimars, your Manaroths, all that stuff. Because both of those different bosses are given different levels of design time than anything else. But the bosses before that, your Star Augurs, your Siegecrafters that are like, you know, iconic raid fights that aren't end bosses are like kind of fucking crazy. All right, and then, so basically you had to like kill weapons on this platform, and, you know, you got to choose what weapons you wanted to deal with. You could only kill one, I think. So they're like killing this one on the way over. And then that dealt with like what you dealt with on the platform. So it was, again, if you guys are seeing a theme, the coolest fucking raid fights ever are ones that involve a ton of creativity, right? Okay, so Siegecrafter, super fucking cool. I'm not going to look at too much of the rest of it, except the last phase of Garrosh looks insane. So I will look at Garrosh here just before we move on. Siege of Orgrimmar, though, we already kind of briefly talked about it with the trinkets and the class design and stuff. This is what the last phase looked like. It wasn't very hard, but it was like really fucking epic. Also, this is like Trekkie's moment in gaming career, which we'll watch. So you had like one of your players, like usually a rogue because of their movement speed, kite this iron star. You had to be it fixated on the closest person, and you had to run it into the boss at the exact right time. Oh yeah, this was the suicide dagger raid, wasn't it? There was a toy in the game or an item that you could cast and it would just kill your character, and you used it to like cheese mechanics and shit, and then they fucking removed it. Oh, I thought that was funny. But then, yeah, here we go. Okay, so they move across the room. Nothing too important there. We're going to kind of just go until it's a little lower. And you guys can see the end. This is Trekkie's epic moment in WoW. Trekkie, only person alive. That happened to us too. Lip killed Jaina as the only person alive. Dude, that feels so good. Oh, dude, seeing tanks at the top of the meter. Dude, Vengeance was so good. Was it a little too powerful? Yes, but like tanking in MoP, regardless of the amount of damage. I feel like every time you hear tanks speak fondly of MoP, people criticize them naturally and say, oh, well, of course you liked it. You were like top damage. But I think, well, one, also doing good damage is fun. But even without the offensive part of Vengeance, how Vengeance worked defensively, where all of your heals and absorbs scaled off of your attack power, in Mists of Pandaria, you never had more agency of your character than you do than you did then. It was just insane. So Siege, awesome raid. Awesome raid. Okay, Warlords of Draenor. Again, a expansion heavily criticized for its lack of things to do as a casual player, both on the mounts, achievements, and just general things in the game. Garrisons were basically a flop outside of a natural gold farm. But one thing that is often missed when discussing Warlords of Draenor, especially amongst casual fans, is the fact that it was up there with the End of Legion for the second best class design that's ever been. Notably better than it is now. Like, WoD class design is infinitely better than Shadowlands, although Shadowlands is a bit better than BFA. And also, the raids were extremely high quality. In fact, you could argue that if you were to average out the raids of every expansion, Warlords of Draenor actually has the highest average of raids. Highmaul, which was an intro raid, but a very good one, maybe the best one. Blackrock Foundry is a top 5 raid in anyone's list. And Hellfire Citadel, arguably top 5. Again, people look down on we'll talk about HFC in a second, but like the average of raids, like they're all 3 insane. The issue is, look at every other expansion, right? Raids, 5. Mists of Pandaria. Cataclysm, raids, 1 million of them, including the other thing, right? So like, because there were less overall raids, it got flack. And yeah, I mean, there was very little raids over a 2-year period of time. And HFC farm was actually over a year or something. So good raids nonetheless. All right, Highmaul, one of the coolest mythic phases that's ever existed off of Imperator. It also had Butcher, which was like, you know, just a straight up single target fight basically, which I'm always a huge fan of those, as you'd know. But Highmaul, I feel like in a way you have to loop in Highmaul with Blackrock Foundry because they kind of were the same raid. Again, this was before the BFA design of no tier. So Highmaul and Blackrock Foundry were kind of like they kind of loop in with each other, or are usually looped in together. So we're going to probably treat them as that. Fucking banger raid. Blackhand, one of the coolest bosses ever. Go ahead and check in every box. It's got a burn in the last phase with like part of the room getting taken away. See other fights in the past like Ragnaros, you know, the like firefighter back in Ulduar. Just anything like that where you just remove room and still have to make it work is just really, really fucking cool. You fall through the floor. In my opinion, if you ever fall through the floor on a raid boss, that's already top tier shit. You know, I think a lot of people in current raids will give Nathria a lower rating because we ended up killing it in the second reset, which meant that the damage check wasn't as bad. But you can't deny that Nathria on Mythic is really fucking cool. First phase, unique, cool. Second phase, fall through the floor, get gripped around the platform, important ad management, his sword, you're fighting them both at the same time, damage sharing. And the last phase is cool too. Yeah, it's a really fucking sick fight. Anyway, point is, you fall through the floor, it's a sick fight. Case closed. We'll just leave it at that. Blackrock Foundry is nuts. Blast Furnace is a fight that people love or hate. It was very hard. Some people loved how intricate it is. I know Preach, I think, rated it as his best boss ever. Completely disagree, but very liked it a lot. I played a Windwalker at the time, so Iron Maiden was awesome. It was like a multiple spread out bosses in the last phase where old Storm, Earth, and Fire before they ruined it. And Chi Explosion, you just like kind of ripped. It was fucking awesome. Yeah, Blackrock Foundry, top tier. Hellfire Citadel, we already went over this the other day, but like Hellfire Citadel had almost perfect difficulty curve. It had a ton of bosses. It had the mid-raid wall. It had Gorefiend right in the middle, and then past Gorefiend, you had Fell Lord. You had the bird boss on the edge. You had Sokrathar that were like all kind of in a tier, and then you jumped a tier to Tyrant Valhari and Zul'Harak, right? And then after after Zul'Harak and Tyrant, you had Manaroth, and it was just like this constant bosses getting harder and harder and harder. That is so hard to recreate where that's actually done effectively. Archimonde was an awesome last boss. Manaroth is one of the very best penultimate bosses that exist. So you'll see in my ranking later, but HFC is a fucking banger. It is an awesome raid. And also it had like cool unique trinkets, right? That raid had the Arcane Mage trinket. If you want to make the trinket argument for Siege of Orgrimmar and Throne, you have to make it for HFC. HFC had class trinkets. Some were awesome and really cool. Some weren't that good. So if you play a class where it wasn't good, maybe your idea of it isn't as good. It had Soul Capacitor. It had the Arcane Mage trinket, like I said. It had the rings as well. It had like the damage rings that you could like use to like blow up one thing or just use for raid damage. Very cool. Very cool raid. Vastly underrated in my experience discussing raids of all time. I want to talk about the last two expansions. Keep in mind, I spent more time on the previous ones here because I feel like less and less people in the chat can relate to them. So I wanted to give you my opinion of it and also show you a little of the fights because most of you were around for Legion, BFA, and Shadowlands, right? So, all right. So certainly, coming in at almost certainly on the top 5 of my list would be Emerald Nightmare. And you may be thinking, Max, you're joking. And you're right. Emerald Nightmare was complete dog shit. It was cleared in 17 total hours from when one guild started. And it had... Cenarius was a really cool boss. Xavius was actually a really cool boss. 2, it was just undertuned. In fact, I think we're going to have this conversation later on with Firelands and Battle of Dazar'alor and Emerald Nightmare, in that all of those raids, besides Ragnaros and Firelands and besides Jaina in Battle of Dazar'alor, they all had really cool, interesting, like next level uniqueness, like some of the most unique bosses ever in the raid. It's just that when you're raiding bosses in a raid in your mind, you think of the tuning when you did it. No matter how cool a boss is, if you kill it in 2 pulls, like who fucking cares, right? You don't even remember that. I will say that like I think Emerald Nightmare had really cool bosses. It was just they were so easy, and Xavius was Xavius was a really cool idea for a fight. It was just way too fucking easy. Trial of Valor right after Emerald Nightmare. And again, maybe you have to think of all these fights together, like Trial of Valor and Emerald Nightmare looping it in with Nighthold. Trial of Valor, Helya, one of the best last bosses ever in history. Like, I'm serious. Like, if you made a top 5 end boss list, if you weren't basing it off of nostalgia or how important that character was in lore, Helya would probably be in or near a top 5. That's how good the boss was, even though it was only a 3-boss raid. Also a really good raid in general. Like, Trial of Valor, Odin and Guarm were both sick and good in their own way. Okay, and then moving on to Nighthold. Nighthold, in my opinion, is going to be in almost everyone's top 5 as well. It was one of the coolest looking raids. It kind of helps that it was like, you know, around Suramar. Like, Suramar just looked so cool. It had a couple of easy first bosses, but once you got to that difficulty curve, man, it was just perfect. It just did everything right after a certain point. It has Star Augur, which is arguably the single best non-end boss ever in the game. It had Grand Magistrix Elisand, which was like a cool time slowing and stopping mechanic. Again, one of the very coolest penultimate bosses in the game. And it has Gul'dan, probably the single coolest mythic phase to ever exist. Obviously, it's a very popular lore character involved, but it was just a really cool fight in general. And they made a very good decision, similar to the bad decision they made on Eternal Palace with Ashara, where they had that really boring P1 in it. On Mythic, they may have done this because there was a Mythic phase, but they removed the super boring heroic version of Gul'dan at the beginning, and they let you get straight into the fight. Always respected that. The way it played was cool. And also, fun fact, it was the only end boss in my memory, and I'm pretty sure in history, where it was literally optimal to have 10 melee DPS and 4 ranged, which is usually the exact opposite of that. Very cool raid. Moving on from Nighthold, we have Tomb of Sargeras. Couple of cool bosses in the middle of it. Maiden was really cool. Mistress was really cool and hard. Desolate Host was a huge letdown. That boss could have been so much better. The rest of the bosses were like kind of whatever. Now, this is where you start getting a big mix of opinions. I enjoyed Fallen Avatar a lot, and I enjoyed Kil'jaden a lot. I thought they were hard. They were very difficult, but like nothing on Fallen Avatar was bullshit. It was just really fucking hard. And you could argue that a boss shouldn't be that hard. Maybe that's the thing, because like we were shitting on bosses earlier for being too easy, so can you shit on bosses for being too hard? Typically, I like the challenge, so I never dislike those bosses. My opinion may differ, and I can tell you it's going to differ from a lot of yours. I really like Tomb of Sargeras a lot as a raid. I have no issue with Fallen Avatar and Kil'jaden. I don't think either of them are like the best boss ever, but I think they were both really good. KJ had too many bugs though. That's true. And that's actually one of the few raids where I didn't actually do it like world top 5 or top 10 because of the situation back then. So I probably have less of an experience because like we took like 3 weeks off during that raid and we didn't kill the same boss that was killed world first. So I don't have the opinion that Method would have. Either way, moving on. Antorus, another underrated raid, I think. I don't know if Antorus would make it in a lot of people's top 5, but it was a fucking cool raid. It was a really cool raid. Argus was a good last boss. They went away from the immunity requirement that was there at like Tomb of Sargeras, except for Argus. Like they did the entire raid, immunities completely different, didn't work. And then maybe someone else designed the last phase of Argus because like it was like extremely immunity heavy, like N'Zoth level immunity heavy. So that was weird, but very cool fight. Agrimar was cool. It was a little too easy. There was a bunch of really unique, cool bosses. But I mean, even us at the time, which we were like, you know, raiding only a couple hours a night outside of the first day, like we and Method both cleared 2 Agrimar, and then Method killed Agrimar on day 1 or the beginning of day 2 or something. That's a lot. So maybe the raid was a little undertuned, and that's maybe why that was there. The only last boss that was 3-tanked. Well, it didn't need to be 3-tanked though. In fact, we didn't 3-tank it for World Top 5. We 2-tanked it, and I never really understood why anyone 3-tanked it. But also, we're someone who would have never 3-tanked unless it was required, and it just simply wasn't. Okay, moving on from Legion. What do we have? Okay, so last 2 expansions. You guys have been around for these, so I'll just rapid fire them. Uldir, cool. Fetid was bugged. Gahoon was a really good boss, actually. No issues with Gahoon. Cool raid. Not going to be in anyone's top 5. Battle of Dazar'alor, actually really cool raid. Opulence, super cool fight. Conclave, super cool fight. Rastakhan, super cool fight. And Mechatork, super cool fight. Small problem. All of them were super fucking easy. Every single one of those bosses was done in less than 20 pulls, and some of them less than 10 or 5. And they were like going to be the meat of the raid. So all those fights were really easy. Yeah, Blockade. Blockade was super bugged, but that was like a super easy boss. Blockade, maybe one of the most biggest letdown penultimate bosses ever. And then Jaina was actually a really good end boss. Nothing wrong with Jaina. Jaina was a great end boss. Very highly rated boss, in my opinion. But moving on, we have Eternal Palace. Ashvane, great fight. The actual difficulty curve of Eternal Palace is what I'll say in its benefit, is that Eternal Palace had Ashvane, excellent mid-raid wall. I love the mid-raid wall. And then it goes on from there to Orgozoa, to Queen's Court, to Zakul, to the end. They were all like kind of in a line of difficulty. You could argue Orgozoa was a little harder than Queen's Court, depending on the comp. And then, yeah, and Jaina, Ashara, just going to say this, case closed before anything else. Any fight where you line of sight people on purpose on an end boss, it's dog shit. Bad boss. Crucible Storms, small raid, not in anyone's top 5. Unet took a ton of pulls, but it's not one of the best bosses ever. Not much to say. I guess the one thing I will say is cool is that whoever designed it had the same idea for gear where every single item was like Kiss Curse. You know, it gave you a cool benefit, but it also hurt you in some way. Okay, what's the last thing? Nyalotha? Okay, so Nyalotha was experienced differently depending on who you are. And I think the main thing is Il'gynoth. Il'gynoth, for me, not kidding, by the way, of my non-penultimate bosses and non-end bosses, so not the second boss of a raid, not the last boss of a raid, Il'gynoth is a top 5 mid-raid boss for me of all time. Top 5. That's the boss that we killed world first. That's the boss Method killed world second. That's the boss Pieces killed world third. The boss that you all killed, where you just spread out the entire fight and never dispelled, is a completely different boss, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how fucking hard that boss was on day 1. It was so rewarding. You were rewarded by playing well. The damage checks mattered. Your positioning mattered. Everything you'd ever want in a fight was there. It was fucking awesome. And it was like one of the most fun fights I've ever raid led. But again, that's not relatable because 90% of you killed it the cheese way, and you don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, so either way, Raden, kind of cool. Every other boss was a meme and very easy. Carapace was way too easy. N'Zoth, I feel like people meme it because it was bugged a lot. Like you guys watched our stream and watched all that shit go down. But I think N'Zoth that bug shit on N'Zoth had to happen for them to never let that happen again. Exact quote from Ian to us being, you guys deserve a more polished experience after that. So I'm not too mad about it. N'Zoth was super fucking lame. It was hard, but it was super fucking lame. It could have been so much better. The mythic phase was a joke. Yeah, not so much to say. Okay, this raid, Castle Nathria. Cool early bosses. Hard enough to where Hungering apparently just like beats the shit out of a lot of guilds. If you talk about how easy raids are, didn't we criticize Antorus for almost every boss dying on day 1? We killed, keep in mind, we had 6.5 hours of maintenance on Tuesday that it came out. So our raid was only 9.5 hours long. And we killed 7 bosses at like 208 eye level. Saying like in a shortened day raid, almost every boss was killed. So regardless of how cool they were very easy. Moving on to Sludge Fist. Sludge Fist, one of the best mid-raid bosses of all time. They almost batted 1,000. It was the perfect heal check, damage check, and like personal responsibility check, which is exactly how complicated a single target burn boss should be. They absolutely nailed it. I said before the raid that like 99% chance that boss is going to be something that is killed in literally 2 pulls like it was on beta testing on Mythic, or it will be something that is unkillable because it's so bugged, and there's this small chance that Blizzard makes it so it's so hard that you barely live, and if you finally get to the end, you can only kill it by smashing it into the wall at the end and somehow healing through that with the raid damage coming out, and that's exactly what it was. And then after Sludge Fist, you go straight to Denathrius. No other boss exists, and Denathrius is great. Denathrius has, like I said earlier, you get yoinked around, you fall through the floor. The last phase is like a cool mirror thing. You can't hit people, precise positioning. A lot of people won't know a lot of the stuff we went through for World First, but like the positioning in that, and like the DPS at one point was like somewhat difficult, even though the boss has become massively easier now. Yeah, and without, I guess, all jokes aside, Stone Legion Generals is the worst boss they've ever made. It is an absolute disaster on basically every level. That's it. That's every raid. Now, I'm going to give you all my ranking, but after just talking about them, I need to think about it again. Damn, it's hard to decide between 4 and 5. All right, here it goes. My top 5 in order, as I've talked about them. We have number 5 is Siege of Orgrimmar. Tank Vengeance was sick. Bosses were dope. Siegecrafter, one of the coolest bosses ever. Garrosh, awesome end boss. Paragon, good difficulty curve. It was nice. Siege of Orgrimmar, number 5. Number 4, maybe an unpopular pick, but I agree with it. Hellfire Citadel. Awesome difficulty curve, awesome trinkets, really cool end boss. Maybe the best second to last boss ever in Fallen Avatar. Or not Avatar, I meant Manaroth. Okay, number 3, Blackrock Foundry. Blackhand, one of the coolest bosses ever. Yeah, really cool raid. Was in WoD, so a lot of people didn't appreciate it. Blackhand might be like the best boss ever, actually. Number 2, Nighthold. A lot of people rank Nighthold number 1, but if you do, obviously it's your opinion, but you're a zoomer. You did not raid Throne of Thunder. If you think Nighthold is better than Throne of Thunder, you just simply did not raid and mop. And that's okay that you didn't. So obviously, number 1, Throne of Thunder, GOAT raid, looked insane. Lei Shen, best boss of all time, no question. And yeah, that's it.